and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I'm going to talk to you about, unsurprisingly, God today and the topic of informed consent. Now, what I mean by that in this context, I won't be talking about the dubious circumstances involving Mary's pregnancy while Joseph was out carpenting, though I could. Instead, I'm going to talk about skeptical theism as a mechanism for excusing all the suffering in the world. So, skeptical theism is the God moves in mysterious ways gambit that believers provide in the absence of any decent and coherent account for why the all-loving, powerful and knowing God would permit or even design in such pervasive earthly pain and suffering. There conceptually could be a reason, so there probably is a reason, so there is a reason. It's a hop, skip and a jump from Ebola to God is love. And that's what skeptical theism does. The problem here is that this approach appears to see God using people instrumentally. That is, people become instruments for obtaining a greater good. Doris got cancer because it will build up the soul and character of her family. The Holocaust happened because we can't constrain Hitler's free will. 230,000 people died and countless animals in the 2004 tsunami because, well, I'm not quite sure, but because something good, right? That's what the theist does. This kind of utilitarianism, so moral consequentialism, is a big no-no in Christian theology because such a moral value system has no need for God. Only the entire Bible and construction of Christian theology appear to have God acting as a moral consequentialist. Oops. Now, Paul in the New Testament was against moral consequentialism, as we can see from Romans 3:8, which sets out what is now known as the Pauline principle. And why not say, this is a quote, Romans 3:8, and why not say, just as we are slanderously reported and as some claim that we say, let's do evil that good may come of it. Their condemnation is deserved. So that's a quote that seems to show, well, pretty clearly, I would say, that moral consequentialism is bad news. So when you are doing things in a utilitarian fashion, however, it's often the done thing to ask people for their informed consent. This is something philosopher James Sturber talks about in his book, Is a Good God Logically Possible? So on the Pauline principle, however, Sturber observes that humans can have exceptions to the rule that don't apply to God. So this is a quote from his book, page 50. They allow us to do evil that good may come of it only when the evil is trivial, easily reparable, or the only way to prevent a far greater harm to innocence. So it's difficult to see how God's widespread permission of the harmful consequences of significantly evil actions could be justified as an exception to the Pauline principle. Could be a justified exception to the Pauline principle. In addition, the standard exceptions that are allowed only seem to be allowed because the agents involved lack the power to accomplish the good or avoid the evil in any other way. Lack of power is crucially important to the justification of these exceptions. Yet clearly God is not subject to any such limitation of power. Thus God can negotiate crowded subways without harming anyone in the slightest. God can also prevent a temporarily depressed person from committing suicide without lying to them. And God can save all 20 civilian hostages without having to execute any one of them. Consequently, none of these exceptions to the Pauline principle that are permitted to agents like ourselves because of our limited power would hold for God. The idea under scrutiny is that, and we often see this with medical procedures, it is good and right to inform someone of the risks and harm or potential harm to them before carrying out an action that involved them or someone in their legal care, like a child. So if a doctor is going to give you an injection or perform surgery on you, they will talk about the pain and side effects of the procedure to weigh up against the benefits. Armed with that information, the patient often gives consent and subjects themselves to the procedure for the greater good it will hopefully bring about. God, not so much. When little Layla, 6-month-old baby, is given cancer by God, no one is asking her parents whether the death of their baby is going to be okay, whether the death is worth it for their own souls being built up to some new level of understanding and strength. No one asked those 230,000 tsunami victims or all of their relatives whether it was okay to use their lives to bring about some other greater good. A greater good, mind, that no one has yet worked out. As Sturber says, quote from page 74, if God's permission of the infliction of such evil consequences is to be justified, then at some point these victims of wrongdoing need to be able to give their informed consent to what was done to them. Some theists maintain that we simply wouldn't or couldn't understand God's motivations. We are barely given good enough evidence that there even is a reason, let alone a substantive explanation of what that reason is. And I just don't buy that this reason will be beyond our ken. As Sturber continues, page 74 to 5, morality, as we noted earlier, he says, only justifies impositions that are reasonably acceptable to all those affected. So moral reasons could only justify permitting such consequences if those permissions could be further shown at some point to be reasonably acceptable to all those affected. Only then could God's permission of significant and especially horrendous evil consequences of immoral actions be considered to be morally justified. Where Jesus accepted the unfair suffering and death imposed upon him, he did so with a knowledge and a willing acceptance. But this simply isn't afforded anyone else in far worse predicaments than Jesus was. Although skeptical theism is one of the most ubiquitous methods for excusing God's pathological callousness, there is a good argument to say that it is itself intrinsically morally bad. So using the idea that a greater good comes about from the death and suffering for all these people or animals is itself morally bad because all those people and animals never gave their informed consent to God to be killed, tortured, and to suffer on account of some other greater being coming about, let alone the fact that it never seems to be that this greater good does actually come about, even if we are told what it could be. And we're not told what it could be, it's just that theologians work out what some of these greater goods might be given the existence of omnigod. So the whole problem of skeptical theism is, the whole idea of it is kind of has its rug pulled out from under it, given that there is no permission given by the moral agents involved in these calculations that have to suffer on account of some greater good coming about. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down there. Please like, subscribe and share. And if you guys are kind enough, please join my new group of members by joining the YouTube channel, A Tippling Philosopher. Be really, really appreciated. As ever, question everything, particularly yourselves.